It is July 19th, 1967. The Beatles are fresh off their release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. To celebrate, or decompress perhaps, they've spent the last few weeks on what some may call a bender, taking excessive amounts of LSD, coming into the studio, and spending hours recording strange, aimless jams. But they are the Beatles after all, so of course they've been productive. After procrastinating and stressing the absolute hell out of Brian Epstein, they finished their next single, All You Need Is Love, right in the nick of time before the song's premiere to an audience of 400 to 700 million viewers on BBC's Our World. The song was released shortly after and quickly reached #1 all over the globe. Suffice to say, they've earned themselves a vacation, but John Lennon has an idea. He wants to buy an island in Greece. Picture this, a Beatles compound, 4 villas, one for each of them, a recording studio, an entertainment complex, and plenty of housing for visitors and staff. A concept straight out of a utopian dream. Beatles press officer Derek Taylor elaborates. We are all going to live together now, in a huge estate. The 4 Beatles and Brian would have their network at the center of the compound, a dome of glass and iron tracery above the mutual creative play area, from which arbors and avenues would lead off like spokes from a wheel to the 4 vast and incredibly beautiful separate living units. We would set up a chain reaction so strong that nothing could stand in our way. And why the hell not? They've tried everything else, said John. Wars, nationalism, fascism, communism, capitalism. None of it works. So why not this? This is John's vision, and one he most undoubtedly dreamed up under the influence of lots and lots of acid. So today, the 19th, they've come together in London, partially to discuss the upcoming production of Paul's Baby, Magical Mystery Tour, and partially to discuss this LSD-fueled, communal Beatles Island. So John selected one specific individual to lead their search for this magical island. And who else better but Magic Alex? Alexis Martes, better known as Magic Alex, was, put nicely, a grifter, but a gifted one, who had managed to ingratiate himself with the band, but especially John. John had met him in 1965 and became enamored with a number of Alex's bizarre, mostly worthless, sci-fi flick inventions, including something called a nothing box, a blinking light box that supposedly simulated an LSD trip. He eventually managed to wrangle hundreds of thousands from the band as he was tasked with creating their own recording studio.
I would like to say hello to all my brothers around the world, and to all the girls around the world, and to all the electronic people around the world. That is Apple Electronics.
But he didn't do anything. When we finally got him to do a recording studio, we had a 16-track studio, and we walked in there, it was chaos. We had to rip it all out and start again. He had like 16 little speakers all around the room. You know, there wasn't anything he ever did, except he had like a toilet with a radio in it or something.
John would say of Alex, there's no such thing as genius, but if there are any, he is one. They sent Alex to Greece, his home country, where he supposedly found an island, often cited as Agos, although no such island under that name appears to exist. The island was said to have around 80 acres, surrounded by 4 habitable islands, a small fishing village, beaches, 16 acres of olive groves, and was priced at £90,000. Oh, and by the way, Greece was currently under the regime of colonels, a right-wing junta that had begun in April when a group of colonels overthrew the caretaker government a month before the scheduled elections. It was now a dictatorship, one with plenty of torture and imprisonment of political dissenters. Whoopee. Mr. Political John did not seem to be swayed by this, however, saying, I'm not worried about the political situation in Greece as long as it doesn't affect us. I don't care if the government is all fascist or communist. I don't care. They're all as bad as here. Worse. Most of them. I've seen England and the USA, and I don't care for either of their governments. They're all the same. Look what they do here. They stopped Radio Caroline.
That's what's happening here with the connivance of almost every teenager. We're bound for Radio Caroline, the pirate ship that for over a year has given pop music to something like 20 million listeners.
And tried to put the Stones away while they're spending billions on nuclear armaments, and the place is full of US bases that no one knows about. Which, while there is a grain of sand-sized truth there, it is buried under a mountain of ignorant, privileged, and problematic sentiment. The next day, on the 20th, George and Patty Harrison, Ringo Starr, and Neil Aspinall flew to Athens, where they met Magic Alex and his father, who, by the way, was a member of the Greek military police. They would stay at the Mardis family house in Athens. On the 22nd, Paul McCartney, Jane Asher, Patty's 16-year-old sister Paula, Mal Evans, Alastair Taylor, and John and his wife Cynthia would all travel down to meet with the rest of the group. The Beatles had hired a luxury yacht to take them to look at the islands, but it was delayed due to a storm off Crete until the 25th of July. So they met with the rest of the group at the family home of Magic Alex until the storm rolled over. On the 23rd, the group traveled in a convoy of taxis to Athens to go sightseeing. The taxi containing Paul McCartney, Jane Asher, and Neil Aspinall caught fire from the heat, and they were forced to walk back to a village where they had earlier eaten lunch. Thankfully, they were not mobbed by fans at this time. However, they would be later. The Beatles had accepted an invitation to a performance of Agamemnon by Aeschylus at the Theatre of Delphi. Unfortunately for them, Magic Alex accidentally let slip to the tourism authorities of Greece that the Beatles would be attending, which was quickly broadcasted throughout Athens. I wonder how much pocket change he was handed under the table. And it was later confirmed by Peter Brown that Alex had struck a deal with the Greek authorities. If the Beatles were given diplomatic immunity, allowing them to carry bags containing drugs into the country, then they would pose for press photographs for the Ministry of Tourism. This had been agreed upon without the group's knowledge. So on their arrival to Delphi, they were met by hundreds of fans, photographers, and journalists. The group had no choice but to return to their limousine and leave. The 24th brought along another day of sightseeing while they waited for their luxury yacht to arrive. They traveled out of the city to some more remote villages. But due to Alex's under-the-table deal, their location was continually broadcasted. Alastair Taylor would recall, once on a trip to a hill village, we came round a corner of the peaceful road, only to find hundreds of photographers clicking away at us. The Beatles, by Magic Alex's hand, had become a propaganda tool for the fascist Greek government, which, admittedly, they deserved just as much of the blame for. On the 25th, their yacht finally pulled into port. They spent one more day bumming around, and then on the 26th, their magical journey began, as they would sweep along the coast of Greece, on the way to visit the island they intended to purchase. Here we can see the Beatles' application for purchase of the island, a document held at the British National Archives. They boarded the yacht, popped some acid, and set off. Well, except for Ringo, who decided he had had enough. He left with Neil Aspinall, eager to return to his wife Maureen Starr, who was in the late stages of her pregnancy. Good for you, Ringo. High out of their minds on acid, the group island hopped and sunbathed before making their way to the island in question. Let's hear now from George. It was a great trip. John and I were on acid all the time, sitting on the front of the ship playing ukuleles. Greece was on the left, a big island on the right. The sun was shining and we sang Hare Krishna for hours and hours. Eventually we landed on a little beach with a village, but as soon as we stepped off the boat, it started pouring with rain. There were storms and lightning, and the only building on the island was a little fisherman's cottage, so we all piled in. "'Scuse us, squire. You don't mind if we come and shelter in your cottage, do you?" The island was covered in big pebbles, but Alex said, "It doesn't matter. We'll have the military come and lift them all off and carry them away." They would spend a little while longer in Greece. Perhaps the acid was finally wearing off, or perhaps the dream seemed a little less appealing after seeing the pebbly island in person. George and Patty returned to England on the 29th, and then 2 days later, John and Paul would return as well. The Beatles had been required to buy special export dollars before applying to the Greek government for permission to spend them. Alistair Taylor did eventually get clearance for the purchase of the islands, but by that time the group had moved on. The £90,000 worth of dollars was sold back to the government, and the value had risen, giving the Beatles an £11,400 profit on the unrealized deal. It was about the only time the Beatles ever made any money on a business venture, George would say. Okay, so I actually have to cut in here after recording my initial script because Beatles fans are brilliant and fucking insane. So like I said, there is no island named Agos. Why it is called that here is unclear, but we have someone who is on the case. I found this Substack called Follow the Sun, The Beatles in Greece. If you want to really dive deep into this visit, please check out this website because it is incredible. This individual has spent a substantial amount of time trying to identify this famed Beatles island by referencing eyewitness accounts and home footage, and even visiting the island themselves. They believe that the pieces of land that the Beatles intended to buy were the Liha Donisia Islands. The largest of these islands is named Manolia, which is about 80 acres in size. It gets deeper. Just last year, during Paul's most recent tour, in the background, he played some yet unseen home footage. Footage that this individual believes is not only located in Greece, but on the island of Manolia itself. He cross-referenced this video with a photograph of the island from 1974 in an attempt to confirm that this was indeed footage from Manolia. Nothing is definitive, and it is still not confirmed that Manolia was even the island they intended to purchase. But huge props to this fellow Beatles fan. Please go check out their website. Of the trip, Paul would later recall, "We went on the boat and sat around and took acid. It was good fun being with everyone, with nippier moments. For me, the pace was a bit wearing. I probably could have done with some straight windows occasionally. I'd have enjoyed it a bit more. But nothing came of that, because we went out there and thought, we've done it now. That was it for a couple of weeks. Great, wasn't it? Now we don't need it. Having been out there, I don't think we needed to go back. Probably the best way to not buy a Greek island is to go out there for a bit. It's a good job we didn't do it, because anyone who tried those ideas realized eventually there would always be arguments. There would always be who has to do the washing up and whose turn it is to clean out the latrines. I don't think any of us were thinking of that. Enjoy the easygoing times while you can, boys, because things are about to get a whole lot worse. This has been part 1.5 of the Making of Magical Mystery Tour. Coming soon, the completion of this saga, covering the entirety of the making of both the movie and the double EP/album. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this. I have a Patreon where for $1 you can watch videos early, and for $2 you'll get exclusive content of me and my girlfriend, who's a new Beatles fan, discussing and reviewing each album from the perspective of an old Beatles fan and a new one. Thank you again for watching.